damn it, money, where have you been my whole life?
You mentioned you know what embodied wealth feels like. What does it feel like?
Wealth and money are not the same thing, right? Money's a tool. Wealth is a state of well-being. I wrote this book, I want to say first and foremost for myself. I've been working through the legacy and lineage of scarcity in my body as long as I remember, and I was committed. We can experience poverty in many areas of our lives, not just in financial stability. And they really require care and attention and resources to heal ourselves from the many places we feel poverty.
Welcome back to the You Potential Podcast. This week, my guest is Elizabeth Husserl. She's a registered investment advisor, co-founder of Peak 360 Wealth Management, a certified money coach, and the author of the brilliant book, The Power of Enough, which we dive into today. She has a master's degree from Tulane University in beautiful New Orleans, a master's in East-West psychology. She's led workshops at Google, Airbnb, spoken at Wisdom 2.0, and so many other places. This conversation today is about why you can have more than you need, more than enough money, but yet you can still feel poor or you don't have enough inside. And often, it's hard to name why we feel this. Today, we dive into exactly how we can fix this. Before we get into the episode, please head over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation with Elizabeth Husserl. Elizabeth Husserl, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I wish you could be here in Canada, minus 35, as opposed to your sunny California weather, but nonetheless, you are here, and
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. We're going to have a good conversation about money, what enough is, your experience on how you came to writing this book, and a whole bunch of other insightful conversations, I am sure, because you are an insightful woman. I thought we would start, though, with Lynn Twist. She is someone who I've really looked up to in this field of money, emotions, well-being, spirituality. And I want to get to the book, but she foreworded your book. So my first question is, what was it like to have the pioneer of this field, one of them, someone to write a foreword to your book, such as Lynn Twist? What did that feel like in your body?
Oh my gosh, Sean, I mean, the smile on my face just with this question and the smile in my heart is huge, because I think similar to you, like I know where I was 20 years ago when I read The Soul of Money, and it sounds like potentially you as well, right? Such a pioneer and I was like, wait a second, she's bringing this concept of sufficiency to the table. Who is this woman? And so I've been literally, I'm not ashamed to say it, stalking Lynn for many, many years. We both live in the Bay Area. You know, I've seen her on many stages, Wisdom 2.0, all over. And when I was writing the book, I was like, oh my God, she would be amazing to write the foreword. And I'm like, who in my world knows her? So literally, I reached out to everyone, LinkedIn. I've had people who worked at the Pachamama Alliance that she was a co-founder. And funny enough, you know, Lynn, she just turned 80 last year, and so her world is not social media per se, right? I couldn't find her on LinkedIn. I couldn't use my old avenues to get a hold of her. And so long story short, I went the old-fashioned way, and I'm like, is she hosting a workshop that I can participate in? And I found one that was both online but also in person. And so I started... Gosh, this was end of fall of 2023. I did a 6-month workshop called Sophia Sisters with 50 women across the world discovering or exploring the oncoming of the Sophia century, like when women can really step into their wisdom. And I got to meet her in Napa Valley in March of 2024. And I remember coming up to her. I'd printed out my first 2 chapters of the book. And I'm like, Lynn, you know, we've created a relationship over the last 6 months, but I have this huge ask. Would you be willing to consider writing the foreword to my book called The Power of Enough? I'm just taking another first step in your footsteps. And she just lit up, Sean, had this huge smile and said, yes. And then said, now what does that mean? So I think I share that story because Lynn is, for me, the person who most embodies unconditional love and unconditional acceptance. So she is the real thing when it comes to what you read in the book to who she is as a person. And so she met me with that yes. And then we had to be like, okay, this is what it means. This is how I can help. And then I took a next step with her and I did a 6-month journey called the Remarkable Women's Journey, where it was a much smaller group, only 12 of us. And we went down to the Amazon together.
Wow.
And so my best stories with Lynn Twist are 10 days in the Amazon where all 12 of us were off electronics. No one had cell phone. No one had any access to media. It was just us being together in these indigenous communities that she's been working with for the last 30 years in relationship to each other, sharing our dreams, sharing medicine and circles and all these different things and being in this deep conversation. And I think that's really where she understood the essence of what I was trying to do in my book. And from there, she's like, give me 5 days. I know what I want to say. She whipped out the foreword. And the day my book came out, the only thing I wanted to do was to go sit with Lynn. So I drove to her house in San Francisco and I recorded a video of her reading the foreword back to me, which is my private video. I haven't shared that in social media because it's mine, but it was just like such a full circle of just deeply tracking my mentor for 20 years and being able to work closely with her for the last 2.
Damn, dreams do come true, hey?
do come true. And we can stalk people with kindness and love, and we can meet those people we most admire.
Wow. What a story. I mean,
Yeah.
down to the Amazon sounds like an experience in and itself.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So in the foreword, she said that
Mhm.
Elizabeth is a shining light in the darkness. I mean, those are big words. Those are kind, loving words coming from this mentor. And I like how you mentioned she perhaps lit the cave that you're continuing to shine a light on. When you first saw your book next to hers, even if it was in the same bookstore, did you ever feel like, who am I to be doing this? This can't be real. I'm next to Lynn Twist.
Oh my gosh. I mean, Sean, I actually would ask that. I'm like, Lynn, I'm writing this book on the power of enough, and there's times that I don't feel enough. And she would just laugh and smile with me as an 80-year-old mentor would do and be like, of course, you have to continue to work through your own experience of scarcity. So I think the honest truth, Sean, is that I wrote this book, I want to say first and foremost for myself, right? Like I've been working through the legacy and lineage of scarcity in my body as long as I remember. And I was committed to the extent that I could, not passing it on to my daughter, right? And so any author has those feelings of like, is anyone going to read it? Is there any value to what I write? Is it coherent, right? Like, did I, punctuate my sentences? That's why we have amazing editors. But, I even writing The Power of Enough. And I think what's really important to say, I've written the book. It's a super practical guide with so many tangible tools and resources, and it's an everyday practice. Right? I continue to practice enoughness and satiation and conversations with money every single day in my life because it's like, it's not that we go to the gym on the 1st of January and say, I'm done for the year, right? Like I did all my exercise. You have to keep going back. And so the same thing with our relationship to money. It is a daily practice. But I know where I'm going. Like I know what the end experiences, not in terms of results, not in terms of a dollar in my bank account, but what embodied wealth feels like, what does satiation feel like. And even if I wake up and I'm not there, I know how to make my way back there. And I think that's the key distinction.
You mentioned what embodied wealth feels like. What does it feel like?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it feels, in my words, right? Because I feel like everyone finds their words for it. But in my words, it's like, it's when I know I love my life. right? I've had that mantra for the last 12 years, and my husband just smiles at me because he wouldn't use those words. Those are my words. But it's like, I love my life. I'm connected to meaning. I feel deeply satisfied by the strategies that I'm employing to fulfill my different needs, right? So embodied wealth is that somatic state of feeling satiated and fulfilled with the resources I currently have. Right. So it's very different than the resources I'm wanting or calling in. Goals are really important, right? Visions are key and vital to us growing as humans. But embodying wealth is recognizing what's at your fingertips and finding strategies to fulfill that experience of wealth that are both monetary and non-monetary. Like I like to tell people, wealth and money are not the same thing, right? Money's a tool. Wealth is a state of well-being. And I've committed my life and my practice and my guidance with clients to help them understand how wealth is a state of well-being and money is one of the many resources that can help you experience well-being.
I'm stopping myself from going into this because about getting a little bit more granular on the difference between money as a tool and the experience of well-being. Because you said a whole bunch of interesting things. You often talk about a relationship to money and our money stories. I want to perhaps uncover a bit of yours by going back to one of my favorite places in the world, New Orleans. I understand you grew up there.
Born and raised.
Born and raised. I've been there I'm looking at New Orleans Jazz Fest poster right there in front of me. But
oh my gosh.
Having the hindsight you do now on that explanation on money and the difference between wealth, what did New Orleans teach you about money and wealth that you perhaps didn't realize as a kid, but you can go back and connect the dots now?
Oh, 100%. That is such a great question. And on all my interviews, no one's asked me that. So good job on bringing a unique question to the mix. I think New Orleans, for those who've been there will relate to this. And those who haven't, may you go, because it's the most magical city in the States, I think. Is New Orleans is such a mix of both cultures and its history, and such a vibrant place that literally celebrates everything, right? In New Orleans, we celebrate crawfish and Strawberry Fest, right? And Jazz Fest and Mardi Gras Fest and New Orleans Fest. Like there's just so much
Oyster Fest.
Celebration. Oyster Fest, right? We celebrate that we woke up. You know what I mean? And when we do it with the po' boy and sweet tea on the porch. And so I think and I didn't know this because when you're born in one place, you think everywhere is the same, right? And so I remember when I left New Orleans, I was like, wait a second. People don't just like go out and listen to music all day long. There's not a jazz funeral when we celebrate our loved ones dying. Like there was all these traditions and rituals that I think I took for granted while I lived there because it was just part of the ethos. But I think what's important to note is that I left New Orleans when I graduated from college, right? I went to Tulane, I did my undergrad in economics, and then I moved to Oaxaca, to Mexico, which is also a magical place. But I had to leave home, to recognize what it is that I had at home. I think that happens to many of us. And why Oaxaca was important, because I went to work with a nonprofit and I was going to be organizing their community economics initiative, which basically means I was going into indigenous villages and teaching indigenous women how to create savings and loan cooperatives amongst themselves so that they could create agency in being able to save their own resources and lend amongst each other instead of needing to depend on loan sharks that were charging them these incredibly high interest rates, right? And so I had a super clear plan, Sean, of what I was doing, applying the economics I had learned, felt super excited, armed with my tools and my spreadsheets and my techniques. But long story short, the 2 years in Oaxaca was less about what I taught, but more about what I received. And what I received was this embodied experience of recognizing that even though these indigenous communities may have lacked material resources in the way that I knew them back home, they were so rich in so many other areas in their lives, in their community relationships, right? And their sense of purpose and connection to nature and their practical abilities to make their clothes, build their homes, grow their food, things that I'm like, oh, I wasn't taught that in college. I should probably know how to do that, right? And so it was such a humbling experience to be like, my work isn't in Latin America. My work is back in the United States where people actually have a lot more resources, but feel poor. And what is that about, right? And I think when I now think about New Orleans, to answer your question, New Orleans is one of those places. I mean, Louisiana is one of the poorest states in the United States, but it's so rich in culture, in tradition, in a sense of belonging and connection, right? There's such a friendliness amongst people and you take care of each other. And so even though the financial stability has been tough at times for the state, so many other needs are being met in non-monetary ways. And I think it took leaving New Orleans to understand that and to appreciate, the richness that it has, which I think is what attracts people to the city in the first place.
Thank you for that. There is this richness to that city. It's magical. And it seems like the word softens coming up. And what I mean by that is the city in a way softened you or opened you up to experiences in a way. And I say this, that you went down to Oaxaca as the teacher, from what I understand, the expert. And in your words, it sounds like you were the student when you left, which is a humbling
100%.
experience. And I was in Oaxaca with our family for Dia de los Muertos. Sorry, my bad pronunciation. And we did a cooking course. And I won't name the country, but this participant with us was being like, I don't know about this. Like Oaxaca, culinary capital of Mexico. And they're like, in my country, this is how we use that spice. And the lady just looked at him like, you're in Oaxaca, lady. And I use that as often we become rigid in our ways of thinking, especially when we're the expert. How, whether it's the softness of New Orleans or the awakening that New Orleans gave you, why do you think you were able to go from the expert to the actual student in Oaxaca?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think part of it, Sean, I have been always raised multiculturally, right? Like my family's originally from Colombia, on my mom's side, on my dad's side, from Europe. And so I think I've always been like a student who approaches the world with curiosity. I once told my dad, I'm like, Dad, I want to get paid to ask questions, which I'm like, oh, podcast didn't exist back then. I'm like, now I think I probably would have taken a different career if podcast had been a thing, right? And so I think part of it was, I was very clear when I went to Oaxaca, I wanted to work with a local organization. So basically Oaxaqueños, and then I would come in and learn versus an international organization that was coming in to teach. And so I think just already framing it that way, I was coming in just to help create a community's economic initiative, but from the inside of what they were teaching me, how indigenous communities in that region were held, right? How did they hold their political structures, right? How they held their sovereignty. And so I think I always knew that I was going there to learn. I didn't think though how much I didn't think how much it was going to be and how that was going to actually impact the rest of my life, because the reality is that I came back from Oaxaca still in my mid-20s. And I remember going back to New Orleans because I went back to my parents' home. I was a boomerang kid back then. I was like, I don't know what's next. And I remember standing in my parents' library, like just looking for a book to read. And I just, this strange wave of satisfaction just swept over me. And it's going to sound absolutely crazy, but I was like, oh my gosh, if I were to die tomorrow, my life had already been worth it. Right? And like, it's for a 25-year-old to say that. Now I look back, I'm like, oh, that's funny. But there was a sense of like, I felt so satisfied. And there's this phrase in New Orleans, la ñap, which means a little extra. And I was like, oh, everything now is a lagniappe, right? And I remember feeling that again when I had my kid, when I had a baby. I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to be as strong as like giving birth to a child, right? I was like, amazing. Everything else is extra. But there's this feeling of like, I was given the grace and the gift of knowing what enoughness felt like in my body before I understood what it meant in my brain. And that's really important, Sean, because we come to abundance thinking a lot of times through our brain. And the scarcity brain is real, but I feel so grateful that my first kind of awakening happened in my body, and it took me 20 years to then unpack that and write a book about it. I mean, that was more than 20 years ago. And so it's been like cooking. I've been like that mole, right? Like the 30 ingredients sauce that you were cooking probably in Oaxaca, and just like metabolizing that and really being mindful on how to choose the words to describe it, knowing that it's going to be unique for every person, but I can serve as a guide to maybe open those doorways inside of your body to start to even open to the idea that you can experience wealth.
You know, when I read that snippet from Lynn Twist on the foreword when she called you a shining light in darkness, I can sense that right now. And I perhaps can make an assumption that part of the reason why she said yes is that this isn't a book you wrote. This is a piece of you. This isn't just something you want to whip out. How to write a book in 30 days, 20 years.
No, 20 years. Yeah. No, you're right, Sean. Like I committed to two things in this lifetime, a human baby and a book baby. And I now have done both. And I'm
nice.
like, I'm done. I gave my contribution to the world.
Oh, I get the sense you're far from done. When you look back at Oaxaca, is there a moment, whether it was a shared meal, a shared conversation, a shared hot chocolate in Oaxaca that you had with someone that you were like, ooh, this embodiment, this feels different, something's shifting inside of me?
Yeah, no, I wish it was with someone. It was actually, I know exactly when that moment happened. I was teaching a workshop, right? And these workshops, because a lot of these communities were actually like 6 hours outside of the capital of Oaxaca on these super bumpy roads. I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to travel. So they're pretty remote villages. And so we would go for a couple days in a row to take advantage and do as much of a workshop as we could. So it was like the end of maybe 2 days of teaching, and my brain was like just about to explode. So I decided to take a walk by myself. And you know how when sometimes you take a walk and you're not even paying attention to your surroundings, right? And you lift your head and you're like, oh my gosh, where am I? And so that was me. There was a moment that I left the village and then I went walking for a half an hour and I was like, oh my goodness, I have no idea where I'm at. I have no idea I have no idea how to make my way back, right? And I felt utterly lost. And there was a moment, Sean, where I just felt the panic start to set in, because this is way back in the day before GPS and before cell phones. And so I'm like, there's no one to call. I was seriously by myself. But underneath the panic, when I let myself soften, I loved how you used that word before. When I let myself breathe and softened, I was like, wait a second. If I can go beneath the fear, there's actually a deeper holding by the natural world. I could start to hear the hum of the environment around me. And I could start to be like, oh my gosh, I'm actually going to be okay if I just let myself get through the scarcity, the panic, all those harder emotions, and just trust that someone's going to notice I'm gone and come find me. And so it was in that moment of like, again, I was able to taste that the access of wealth that was so different than my experience growing up in a much more urban setting, in a faster setting, that being in that remote indigenous community in Oaxaca gave me. So there was like a reshifting, like a chiropractic alignment in that moment that I came back and it's like I just saw the world differently. And so I started to pay attention, and I started on all my future workshops after hours just sitting down and having conversations with people and asking them, what does wealth mean to you? And so I started asking that question after that experience of being lost in a remote village.
The reason why I love that answer is I feel like we all have these getting lost moments that aren't these big explosion of events. They're these micro, small, but in your case, huge impacts that we often walk by if we're not surrendering or softening or whatever the name, or often we're just too busy. We just have these moments pass by. But the way you're describing, it shifted something inside of you. That's big. So when you
Yeah.
came back to the US,
Yeah.
came back to your call it normal life, how did you respond to that shift? Because I feel often we have these insights on these retreats and we get all this motivation. We get back home, we're ready
Yeah.
to change, but yet, the busyness of life just consumes us and we're back to the way we were. How did you make that change enduring?
Well, I came back to New Orleans. Remember, I was saying that after Oaxaca, I was a boomerang kid who ended up in my parents' place. And I was like, if you ask my mom, she'd be like, she was so disoriented when she got back. And there's a reality to it, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we move through these shifts too quickly and it takes a minute to metabolize the real impact that they've had. And so I would say the first year I was disoriented. And unfortunately, I had a place to come back to. And so, you know, I could work, but I didn't necessarily have to make a career move quite yet. And I think what I then realized, I was like, okay, I have my background in economics. I want to start to explore the behavioral piece, the psychological piece around economics. What do I do to look towards that? And there was actually an economist that I read while I was in Oaxaca, E.F. Schumacher. He wrote Small is Beautiful. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that
Mm-hmm.
book. Yeah. Okay. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. Because he was one of the first pioneers, talking about pioneers who talked about the triple bottom line, people, purpose, and profit. I mean, people, planet, and profit. And I was like, oh, he was a deceased economist. I'm like, I want to learn more about that. And so I ended up at Schumacher College in the UK, working, and I took a class with Manfred Max Neif, who was an economist from Chile, who I speak a lot about in my book, and Vandana Shiva. And I'll never forget that I had the privilege of a different mentor then called Satish Kumar, who's written amazing books, and is just like a deep activist. And again, elder, and we'd have our weekly meetings. And I'm like, Satish, how do I do it? How do I bring these two passions of mine, right? Economics and spirituality and finance and psychology. How do I bridge these two? And he just looked at me. He's like, Elizabeth, take a deep breath. Go back to the root word economics, which means management of the household, and go within.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, Satish, that's it? He's like, yes, sit with that. And I've been sitting with that again for 20 years of like, what happens if we go to the root of things, the essence of economics, the essence of wealth, and we take those concepts and do that deeper inner work of understanding what does management of the household look inside? What is the state of well-being look like from inside? So that was huge. That time in Schumacher College was huge. Then it got me to my master's at the California Institute of Integral Studies in psychology. And then from there, I've started my career really bridging these two worlds.
I'm really interested. What did you find when you went within?
A lot. I love that question. I think that's a great question. What I found was I think on one hand, there's a practical response, which is like, okay, I want to understand the deeper human psychology so I can bring it to economics, which got me to my master's program. But then as I continued to do the deeper work, and I talk about this in the book, again, in my late 20s, when I went within and I sat down and I had my first conversation with money, I found a lot of stuff. I found anger. I was bitter. And so, so many of the tools have been about excavating all the things I've been carrying from my legacy, from my parents' legacy. So, that's a loaded question. Lots of stories to illustrate it. But I have found I've ultimately made my way back to myself.
As I was reading your story, I couldn't help but notice something similar parallels is I understand you moved to the Bay Area, you set up, became
Mhm.
financial advisor, financial planner. I can't remember the specifics, but when you decided to launch your book, to use your words, you came back to yourself, came back home and launched it in New Orleans and not the Bay Area. Did that feel like the right place to birth that book?
Well, I think we're mixing different timelines because I went to New Orleans after Oaxaca. Um, but then I've been in the Bay Area since 2004. So the actual writing of the book was in the
Yeah.
Bay Area. And when the book came out, I had multiple parties and events in the Bay Area, and I had one in New
Okay.
Orleans.
I thought
So I
you
had
did
both.
your, I thought your main launch was in New Orleans, but okay.
Yeah, no, I have many home. I mean, I've come to realize, Sean, that home is where the heart is, right?
Yeah.
And I have lots of dear core relationships in many places.
Yeah.
Um,
When I asked you about what did you find inside, you talked about these money conversations, and it's a big part of your book. And I
yeah,
really
yeah.
appreciate the lens where this exercise is coming from, whether it's yourself, readers, clients. What is consistent themes? I know so many come up, but what have been some consistent themes that you've observed people having when they have these money conversations?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, the first consistent theme I see people either extremely angry at money, right?
Hmm.
Angry that you're not showing up, angry at how corrupt the world is when it comes to money, angry at greed. Like, so there's like this angry category. There's also this category of like, ooh, I want more of you. So, like, a really kind of pulling money close, right? But then I think equally, if there's a third category, Sean, there's people who draw a blank and are
Mm.
like, I don't even know what to say, money. Right. And so it's like I can put them in these different categories because a lot of what I also help people do is to find that right distance. And so basically, a conversation with money is a gestalt chair exercise where you sit and you talk to money in the first person. Right. So you choose a money object. You put it on a cushion or a chair in front of you, right? So it can be a wallet, a credit card. I've actually had someone whip out a little piece of gold and stick it in front of them. Like, you can get as creative as you want. That is your money object. You speak to it. And then after you're done speaking your feelings, not the story, but the feelings that you have, then you switch roles and money gets a chance to respond. But when we're setting up the space, sometimes I'll be like, okay, do you need to pull that chair closer? Do you need to push it apart? And you can already start to see what are some of the dynamics between a person and their relationship to money based on the distance, the spatial distance they need to be able to have this conversation. So almost the body language tells me so much about a person, but it's often anger, avoidance, or grasping are three of the main themes I
Mm.
see.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there when you have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation with your money. What do you find
Yeah.
money normally, on average, says back after the person expresses their feelings?
You know, um, more than what they say back, it's what I see happen is that money will reflect what just got said and be like, but who's really responsible for that?
Mm.
And so what ends up happening, Sean, is that our conversation with money is a mirror into our habits. And money's saying, hey, I'm energy, I'm a resource, I'm a tool that you work with, right? But how are you co-creating the situation that we're in? And so a lot of times there's this moment of like, okay, how do I take responsibility? So I'll give you an example, right? When I sat down and had my first conversation with money, I was angry at it. I'm like, God damn it, money. Where have you been my whole life? Like, I put out my shingle. I'm offering these services. Why aren't you showing up? And then money's response is like, whoa, Elizabeth, you are holding on too tight, right? You sound like, you're treating me like you treat some of your boyfriends, right? I was dating at the time. And I was like, oh my God, money, that's a little bit of a slap in the face, but you're so right. I can be smothering, right? And I had to take responsibility for my relational style because, the whole, some of us are avoidant
Hmm.
attachers or anxious attachers. And so I was like, I'm doing the same to money. And when I kind of got through that first hump, I'm like, well, money, how can we do this differently? And money's like, hey, how about you write all the list of questions that you have? You're trying to be an entrepreneur. And the reality is that no one's taught you how to be an entrepreneur, right? You were raised by two W-2 parents who, earn their income as employees. You just went through a master's in psychology, but no one taught you how to run a business. You have all these questions. So how about you ask 3 entrepreneurs that you know out to lunch, ask them these questions, and then let's continue to check in to see how we develop a plan together instead of you thinking that I'm the one responsible for your success. And I was like, oh, that's actually really good advice, Money. Thank you. And so so do you see how there's ways in which we get angry or we get upset or we push money away or we become avoidant because there's relational styles that we bring to anything and everything. So it's kind of like just, taking a pause and taking money to therapy with you for a day to be like, let's see what's really there.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the You Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show. Thank you for that. This is reminding me of your concept of the financial DNA, that we all are born with these financial DNAs.
Yeah.
Your father was from Colombia. You lived in New Orleans. What story about money were you telling yourself? Because this all just informs the lead up to the conversation you just had with money.
100%. And I think we have to take it one generation back because my grandfather, Walter, was an Austrian Jew who left Austria during the start of the Second World War. And that's actually why my dad was born in Colombia, because that's where my grandfather emigrated to Colombia. He was trying to get to Argentina, no more visas, got off on the first country he could in Latin America. But my grandfather, like many of us or many families who've gone through wars and persecutions, always lived with this felt sense of scarcity, right? There's going to be the Third World War around the corner. He just saved. He hoarded. He wouldn't spend on anything. And that was the environment that my dad was raised in. And my grandfather really wanted my father to get the best kind of leg up career-wise that he could. He really pushed for my father to leave Colombia and do his career as a physician in the States. That's why they ended up in New Orleans, because there was an exchange program between the university in Cali and a university in New Orleans. There's actually a lot of Colombian physicians that I was kind of grown up in community with in New Orleans. But it was always it came from a place of scarcity of you have to build a safe economic foundation because we never know when the other shoe is going to drop. Right. And so what was interesting, Sean, is that, so I was raised by a father who was a physician and my mom's a therapist. So we never yearned for anything, right? All my needs were taken care of when it came to financial stability. My school was paid for. We would travel extensively. We'd go see family back in Colombia. But there was always this underlying sense of scarcity that was so confusing to me as a child because, wait a second, we have what we need. Why do we feel the sense of scarcity? And I would see it pop up when, I would ask for something and, my father, bless his heart, he's deceased now. He'd always lead with a no before a yes. I was like, huh. So I learned early on how to create proposals and budgets and spreadsheets because I was always pitching an idea, right? And so on one hand, I did kind of learn entrepreneurship that way, but there was always this fear of money running out. And so it took me, into my adult years, probably until I was doing my master's in psychology, to be like, there was the sense of scarcity that had nothing to do with financial stability, but had everything to
Mhm.
do with the need for safety, right? The need for belonging. And so what it helped me understand, Sean, is that we can experience poverty in many areas of our lives, not just in financial stability. And they really require care and attention and resources to heal ourselves from the many places we feel poverty, right? And even though it's really important to make sure that we have enough resources to feel financially secure, that's not the only way to give someone an experience of wealth. That has to be met in these other areas and these other human needs. And so I think going back to the question um, of, the trajectory of scarcity, it's been multi-generational. And I remember, I've said it before in this interview, I remember being like, I don't want to pass this on to my daughter
Mhm.
unconsciously. I'm sure I'm going to pass something on, but I want to do my work around scarcity. So I give her a leg up in her experience of wealth and resources in her relationship to money.
Elizabeth, I'm just so fascinated by this conversation, and I'm sorry to use this pun, but I feel like your experience is a beautiful gumbo of different different experiences. You've got the
Yeah.
father, family lineage from having to flee Europe, coming to Colombia, experiencing that Latino togetherness feeling, I'm sure, but then moving to America, having that, it's much like Canada. I'm in Canada in the sense of capitalism, and you got to fend for yourself. Maybe collectivism isn't as much as it is in Colombia, but New Orleans is different, and that also impacts you. You have a
Yeah.
scarcity mentality with your father having a stable W-2 job, but yet you got this desire inside of yourself to do
Yeah.
something, to be an entrepreneur, to be an author. How did you start reconciling all these different moving parts of you to be like, this is my path. I'm not going to pass this on to my daughter?
Yeah. Well, and I think before I answer that question, I need to bring my mother into the equation, right? Because I talk a lot about my
Hmm.
dad's side, but my mom is the proudest Colombian you will meet, right? She is just like so proud of her country and her culture. And so what I learned in all of that was that there was an expense to financial
Mm.
stability, right? And the cost to financial stability was the pain that my mom felt in other areas of her life because she never actually wanted to stay in the States. Their agreement had been 2 years and it was 52, right? Right. My
Oh.
mom's still in New Orleans. And so I think what was also a key ingredient was my mom's grief around her experience of belonging, right? And her experience of connecting. I mean, we had a close-knit Latin community, but the wider context. And so I think what that taught me early on, Sean, is that, financial stability and more money doesn't make us happier. In fact, I'm
Hmm.
watching it be an expense to my mother's happiness. Again, what is that about? And so I think that's a key ingredient, right? And I remember when I started working in finance, I was so struck by how, I don't know if it happens in Canada, but in the States, we call investment securities, right? Like the big compliance of compliance is the Security Exchange Commission,
Yeah.
right? So we call investment securities. I'm like, how crazy is that? Like, we drank that Kool-Aid that our sense of security is placed on money. And money's often like, whoa, that's a lot of responsibility. Like, I don't want that, right? You humans have to figure out your sense of security. But what I think was really important is that when I then met Manfred Max Neif, who's an economist from Chile who does so much work around this idea of um, satisfiers. And what I mean by that is that Manfred Max Neif was saying there's many ways to satisfy our different human needs,
Mm.
right? And the way we satisfy our needs is widely important. We can find something singular or we can find something synergistic. And so in my work with Manfred Max Neif that I got the pleasure of meeting in person when I was in Schumacher, plus all the work that Maslow's done around the science of human needs, I started to realize like, we need to bring these two sciences together so that we can give people practical, tangible tools to understand, what do I mean by wealth being a state of well-being? How is it connected to specific human needs that we all have, which then allows us to say, who cares if we're needy? Because guess what? We all are, right? We have all human needs. But if human needs are universal, the way we satisfy them is unique and personal. And the more interesting conversation around wealth strategies isn't just your investment strategies. Investment strategies fills the financial stability slice of the pie, but equally important are understanding what are the strategies to satisfy your need for leisure, curiosity, connection, belonging, safety, all these other needs that make up our experience of being human.
Hmm. I really like this experience of being human. I mean, that's the core of
Yeah.
who we are. When you think about that lens, that what you've learned on the experience of being human with these domains of money
Yeah.
and well-being, what did you learn from your mother and how she handled that transition coming from Colombia? She wants to go back 52 years, despite,
Mm-hmm.
there might be a longing to go back. What did she teach you when it comes to this equation?
So much. My mother is probably one of the most resilient humans I've ever met. And even though she has been a fish out of water for 52 years, she
Mm.
has managed to keep her sense of joy and her sense of connection. And so I think she taught me that I can find my way back to joy even when life is hard.
Mm.
And I think that's a really key piece, Sean, because, and anyone, just to really make this point clear, I know we learn through stories, but sometimes a conceptual framework is
Yeah.
important. And you can go to my website and you can download this tool for free. And it's called the Wealth Mandala. And what it is a one-page piece of paper that brings together this idea that a mandala is a Sanskrit word for circle. It takes the 12 human needs that I'm talking about, and you can print it out. And the way to work with it is that literally grab a color and you color in the different slices of the pie up until the extent that you feel satisfied and fulfilled in that need, right? And so you color all the way to the edge. If you're totally satisfied, for example, in the need of physical health, because guess what? You're working out every day, or you color halfway in if you're like, I feel kind of okay in my body, but I could be eating better, or you color in very little if you're like, oh my gosh, this need is on fire, right? Sometimes I'll walk into a client's house and they're like, I'm having, heart issues, right? My physical health is where I'm feeling most lack. And so, you do this exercise of coloring all the different needs, and then you take a step back, Sean. And I always tell people, look at that wealth mandala as if it were just this beautiful flower, right? These, we look at a flower, we can appreciate it, and all the petals don't have to be perfect or fully filled out. You just appreciate a flower for its beauty. And so what this wealth mandala does, it gives you a snapshot. I like to tell people it's the most important wealth statement of the year. I do this every year with clients to be like, okay, what does your wealth portfolio look like today? Right? I'm your financial advisor. We have a lot of strategies around the financial stability, but what are those other areas that you're feeling full or you're feeling lack? Right? We need to bring resources and strategies? And coming back to the question around my mom, I think my mom's biggest need that she experienced poverty in throughout her life was belonging, right? She
Mm.
never truly felt like she belonged in the United States, right? I've had that experience myself, and that's where I think there was this cultural phenomenon of seeing Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl halftime show, because for a Latina to see him on stage and to win a Grammy, you're like, I belong here, right? There's a cultural movement around just belonging in different countries that you're culturally at times unaligned with, right? And so what my mom taught me was to have the vulnerability to say, I feel poverty in a different area of my wealth mandala that's not financial stability. And I need to take responsibility to find ways to fulfill that sense of belonging. So I've been healing the need of belonging since a child, because I think that's what I inherited from her, was less scarcity around financial stability, was more scarcity around belonging.
Hmm. On that sense of belonging, what was it like as a Latino woman to see Bad Bunny on that Super Bowl
Oh my
stage?
God. I cried,
Mm.
right? Like, oh, it's still going to make me cry. There was this, I mean, there was that last scene in the Super Bowl when he said, God bless America. And then he said, Chile, Uruguay,
Yeah.
Argentina, Colombia. And he started listing them out. I'm like, oh my goodness, I've been saying that my whole life, that America, our North America, South America, Central America. And he just nailed it, right? That there's just so many more of us to be considered when we're thinking about America.
Mm.
So I mean, we can have a whole podcast just
Oh,
on
yeah.
that, but it was just like there's just something that hit my core of like, it's disorienting at times to grow up in the United States figuring out your cultural identity, right? And I'm sure so many people could relate to that in their own way, but it was at times super enlivening to be in New Orleans, Latina, and there was times that I was very disoriented in New Orleans as a Latina.
Hmm. As a Ukrainian descent white man in Canada, I was like, wow, this guy is awesome. when he
Yeah.
when he was calling out all the countries with
Yeah.
conviction, but yet there seemed to be a softness in his eyes, but he was convicted
Yeah.
in what he was
Yeah.
convinced in what he was saying.
Yeah.
You talk about your mom being a fish out of water. As I looked at your career, you decided to go into a predominantly white male dominated industry, financial advising, continuing this lineage of fish out of the water. And
Totally.
even more so, instead of bringing securities, to use your word, that are going to get the best returns, you brought a mandala to
Mhm.
the table. What was it about finding your place of belonging in this, in a way, foreign environment that we call financial advising?
I so appreciate this question because I don't think I had actually ever made this connection, Sean, of just how my mom's fish out of water experience has most trained me to be a fish out of water in my own industry. So I really appreciate that acknowledgement because I feel like I can go back and say, thank you, Mom, for that.
Mm.
Um, And so I think, and you're right, like I would come home from work and I would tell my husband, oh my God, I just spent the whole day in a locker room, right? That's what it felt like. So much testosterone and so much about sales and numbers and productivity. And again, I love growth. I'm all about growth, but I'm always needs to know the why beneath the growth. And I'll be super clear, like as an investment advisor, I do, apply asset allocation and diversification. And I do have my clients invested in the stock market and bonds and real estates and all that fun stuff. But I hold it with a grain of salt within a bigger framework, right? And so it's taken me, again, I probably started my truly financial advising career back in 2012. So we're going on to 14 years now. And it's taken me all this time to find my thought leadership and feel the courage to bring
Mm.
it forward. Because talk about times being like, oh my gosh, is what I have to offer going to be enough? Am I going to be ostracized within my own industry? And I feel really grateful that I have an amazing crew. Like my organization, Peak 360, I'm a co-founder, amazing humans who deeply believe in my thought leadership and super support me. And so I feel very much at home within my organization, but it took years to create that, right? Where we built the culture of discovery and where we're all there to thrive and we share vulnerabilities, right? And so it took years to create that, but I do feel that my mom gave me the resilience to know that I could survive as a fish out of water. She's reminded me to dance
Mm.
often. I think that's one of my strategies. That's one of my synergistic strategies. Like this morning, I come straight from my Zumba class because every Thursday morning, doesn't matter that it is work hours, 9 to 9:30 to 10:30, I'm dancing because it is what keeps me grounded in all of the other hard decisions I have to do in my life.
Music has a way of just grounding us, hey?
Yeah.
This universal language. Doesn't matter what culture.
Yeah.
You talked about building this this firm that you co-founded.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime we build something, it's never easy. Even Lego with my kids is hard. But building a company in this male-dominated, very legacy-orientated ways of being is not easy. When you think about the bumps and the bruises along the way, you talked about your mom instilling some resilience in you. How do you continue to work with your team together and not, starting to point fingers and fighting? And I ask this from the lens of it's hard to build things, and you did it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have very clear, transparent communication in the firm. So I would say there's a couple different practices that we employ on a weekly basis. The first one is that every Monday for an hour, we all jump together on Zoom, and it's less about business. But what we do is that we take turns choosing one question that everyone has the chance for 1 minute to respond to. And it can be something super light as like, what was the favorite thing from your weekend, to something super deep as like, who's someone that's passed recently in your life that you're grieving, right? Like we can have the full spectrum of questions, but we really take time of understanding who we are as people. So people before profit. And that relationship then marks the rest of our week working together. And the second thing that we do is that every Tuesday through Friday, because that's our Monday meeting, we do this thing called a daily scrum, where there's an email that gets sent at 6 a.m, because we have one person who loves to start their day at that hour. And you say one thing you're grateful for, one thing you're working on, one obstacle you have. And so it's like the daily pulse that we have with our team of just knowing what's happening in their lives. And it gives us this sense of like, oh, this person's having a bad day. Guess what? I'm going to be a little kinder in my email communications to them. Or this person's on cloud 9 and they want to celebrate this thing that wouldn't have normally come out in conversation. So we're able to go through life together as humans and really recognize that we spend a lot of time with each other. And it's not just about the business. It's understanding how we're evolving as people, where we're getting stuck, what we need help on. And I think that's been such a key piece in being able to develop an organization that truly has heart alongside mind and alongside body. Like it truly has heart.
I'm hearing there's a big emphasis on cultivating a sense of belonging.
Yeah. I wonder where that came from.
Yeah. But we all know that when we have that felt sense of belonging to a group, we can move mountains. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Your book, I really, really enjoyed your book. This idea of enough.
Yeah.
It's a powerful, powerful place to arrive. I'm deleting that, not saying arrive. It's a powerful place to be exploring. I don't know if we ever arrive. Yeah. When you think about people who have enough material, but they don't have enough inside, what is one of the first steps? Could be a strategy from your book. It could be by your book, but what is the first step to start reconciling this asset allocation that is just so far from being on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think even the concept of asset allocation can be brought back to the Wealth Mandala, because we all have resources to allocate, but maybe they don't just get allocated in the financial stability. We can bring them to other areas. But I think the simplest way to answer that, Sean, is like if people are like, oh, all of this sounds super interesting, but where do I start? Like, what's the first next step? What I like to tell people, Sean, is that literally tonight, you can do what I call a free 30-day satiation challenge, where for the next 30 days, you grab a notebook and you write, what were 3 things that satisfied you today, right, in your day. And this is really important. It's not what you're grateful for. Gratitude is a heart experience. I'm talking about satisfaction as a body experience. And you'll start to learn that sometimes satisfaction are the hard things. Like, oh my God, I actually got out of my chair and I went to yoga, or I did the workout, or I had a hard conversation with a client that I'd been postponing, right? So notice, what are the 3 things that satisfy you? And then when you do that for 30 days, I tell people, grab a cup of tea and in one sitting, read through your 30 days and start to see what are the patterns that you naturally employ to satisfy yourself in your life. And when you start to get clear on what are those things that are working, then you can turn to the areas that you're like, oh, perhaps I'm not feeling really satisfied in touch or in leisure or in physical health. Go back and be like, what was working? Is there any way that I can get creative and apply some of those strategies into some of these other areas that I want to bring focus on? I like to tell people, just focus on one need at a time, right? It can be overwhelming to be like, I feel deficient everywhere. Be like, nope, for this next quarter or this next year, I'm going to focus on one and see if you can bring some of the strategies that are working. And I like to tell people, diversify your strategies. Some may require the use of money, right? So for example, I do pay for my Zumba classes to go to belonging, to build that muscle of belonging, but some should equally require no money and like non-monetary resources so that you can break the dependency that sometimes we have with money. So for example, in belonging, I once a month invite some of my girlfriends over and we sit and we circle and we just have a deep share, and that doesn't cost us anything, but we're able to satisfy that need for belonging.
Your book, your story, it's very, very interesting. I encourage people to get it, not to sell the book, but I think it's a good exploration for us to dance around this idea of enough. I have one final question as we come to an end, and then I have the one standard question I ask everyone.
Okay.
When you think about the concept of enough or satisfying, I like how you're mentioning that as well. How do you dance with also aspiring to publish a book, to promote your book, to grow your business? How does this dance coexist in Elizabeth?
Yeah, no, it's a great question of like, what's that dance between enough and growth, right? Because you could be like, oh, like what would motivate me to want more, right? And I think what's really important, I think the easiest example here, Sean, is let's use food and nourishment, right? And so if you were to remember the last most amazing meal you had when you're like, ooh, that hit the spot, right? You're like, I felt so
A po' boy
nourished.
sandwich from a convenience store in New Orleans at 2 a.m.
Totally, with a little gumbo on the side, right?
Yeah.
So what's beautiful about that is that po' boy sandwich and that gumbo soup is enough in that moment, right? And what I'm encouraging people is to really savor and be satiated by the decisions that brought you to make that design, that strategy to satisfy you in that moment. But you still have to wake up and have breakfast the next day. You still have to wake up and have dinner 3 days from now. And so what enough is it's a practice of learning to make better decisions on how we design our experience of life. And then we get to practice it again and again and again, right? And so it's like learning to be more creative in how we put ingredients together, right? In some cases, maybe we have less financial resources to work with than what we want to. We can still work with those financial resources. And if you call in more financial resources and more money, well, you can get creative with those strategies. But the goal isn't just more money. The goal is understanding what it means to design a life based on meaning. That's the goal. So the shift is more in the why, and then money's along for the ride to be like, sure, let's go do that. That sounds amazing. But it's based on real nourishment, right? Instead of empty calories.
That explanation is wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. You're
Money's
welcome.
along for the ride. Elizabeth, you're wonderful. I enjoyed this.
Thank you.
You're a great speaker. You articulate really well. Again, I encourage people to go get the book. My last
And
question.
there's an audio book. I'll say one thing. There's an audio
Yeah.
book. And I say that because that I read. Because sometimes, again, if so much of what I'm promoting is this idea of an embodied experience, I know for myself, when I listen to books, like I listen and walk, I take it in differently. So for all of you that maybe experience learning differently, the audiobook is a good way to just like slowly satiate the words and let them kind of like simmer in and talk to different parts of your body.
I appreciate you read the book. I feel like when the author is reading the book, I experience it better, and maybe it creates a thicker roux when it's simmering in.
Yeah.
I think I need some gumbo after this.
I know. Me too. It's lunchtime here in California.
A gumbo would be nice on this cold day as well in Canada. My last question is, let's imagine you're at end of life. It doesn't matter how old you are. You're sitting on a front porch, looking out at a view that brings you complete peace, ease, and a feeling of contentment or content. You decide to write one last letter to your child's child on what you learned was a key to living a life that matters. What would that message say?
Love your life, first and foremost. Find the ways to love your life. Live it fully. Grieve deeply, right? Don't be afraid to grieve, because on the other side of grief is joy. And find those satisfiers that bring meaning to your life and repeat them often so that you know your way to joy.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you. That's a good reminder for myself. So what a great question.
For listeners who want to find the book, your website, where you live online, where would you point them towards?
It's my name, Elizabeth Husserl. That's HUSSERL.com. So that's website with a ton of resources and podcasts and free stuff. And then on Instagram at Elizabeth Husserl. I post often.
Fantastic. I will include all those in the show notes. And thank you so much for not only your time, but leaning into the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been one of the best ones I've had. So thank you.
What a fascinating conversation with Elizabeth. I enjoyed hearing her story so much and how her career has unfolded in a way that allowed her to write this fantastic book on such an important topic. What is enough? Or as she calls it, the power of enough. We've all met those people, and she talks about them. She's met them in Oaxaca and amongst other places that have almost everything they need, except perhaps one of the most important things, the feeling of enough. So this week, my question for us is, what would change in our lives if we stopped chasing more and started asking, what already satisfies me? Because sometimes it's not the answers we learn from, but the questions. Thank you for tuning in this week to the You Potential Podcast. Before you head out, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next week, take care.